So in modern astrology, Mercury is pretty much boiled down to your communication, like the way you talk. And while that is definitely true, there is so much more to Mercury in ancient astrology. In the ancient world, Mercury was called stillborn, which translates to the gleaming, the glittering, or the glistening one. So Mercury's symbolism, or basically what Mercury means, is going to come from mostly three places. It's astronomy, mythology, and the planetary affinities. So let's start with mythology. The planet is connected to Nebu, and Nebu is a Mesopotamian god of scribes and commerce, writer of destiny, and humanity's source of wisdom. It's already pretty obvious to us that Mercury is a scribe or writer, but Mercury also has a connection with trade and bartering and selling. Writer of destiny, that's a very interesting one. This will become more apparent later down the line when we start talking about the houses, but Mercury rejoices in the first house. The first house is known as like the steering wheel that you use to like direct your life, where you're going, where you're headed, what's in store for you, like your destiny. Humanity's source of wisdom, that makes a lot of sense too. We usually connect Mercury to like libraries and like the internet, places of like information, you know. Hermes is the Greek equivalent of Nebu. And fun fact, Thoth is the Egyptian equivalent and Odin is the Norse equivalent. And of course, Mercury is the Roman equivalent. This is all the same god, just transported into different cultures. Hermes is the patron of writing, that's a no-brainer, but also hard sciences. Whenever I do a career reading and I see that Mercury is a part of someone's career house, I always recommend, hey, like, do you have an interest in STEM fields, science, technology, engineering, or mathematics? We've got commerce coming up again. Hermes is also the god of travel. Now, this is a very interesting one because if you have a background in modern astrology, you probably connect Jupiter with travel, not Mercury. But because the planet moves so fast, it's got that connection with travel. Hermes is also the god of athletics. That's because there's this connection with dexterity and agility. Also the god of luck. Later in the lesson, you'll learn more about Mercury's randomness, but essentially luck is a random thing that happens. Protector of thieves and guide to the underworld. There's no way to get around this. Mercury is sneaky and has a connection with magic, like pulling the wool over the eyes. We'll also get to this later about why Mercury. Now, learning about the mythology can be a lot of fun, but make sure you don't go like too deep with it because the mythology doesn't always line up. For example, Zeus or Jupiter is the king of the gods. But in astrology, Jupiter does not occupy this role of centrality. It's actually the sun. So we've got to be careful with the mythology. It's fun, but it doesn't always apply. Okay, now let's talk about Mercury's astronomy. Mercury gets much of its meaning from how it moves in the sky. The questions to ask yourself are, what do you see when you look at Mercury? Or how does Mercury move? How does it make you feel when you look at it? What do you think ancient people were thinking when they were looking at it? And remember to always keep it geocentric. So if you want to get really good at astrology, you gotta look at the sky. Mercury is only visible around sunset and sunrise. So it's almost like this is something that rarely shows itself, or you have to really go out of your way to find it. Mercury is also the second fastest planet. So with Mercury, things happen very quickly. In modern astrology, Uranus is said to be the planet of like sudden changes. But because Mercury moves so fast, in ancient astrology, it's Mercury that is these things that happen very quickly, very suddenly, very unexpectedly. Also, this planet never leaves the sun's side. Mercury can only travel 28 degrees away from the sun. That's not even a full zodiac sign. And because Mercury is so close to the sun all of the time, Mercury has that access, that immediate access to the wisdom that the sun supplies. That's why the god Nebu is symbolized as the source of humanity's wisdom. Mercury goes retrograde about every 3 months, which means Mercury is in this perpetual state of bouncing forward and backward, just like this. That's symbolic of Mercury constantly changing or undoing what was initially done. Mercury is the only planet that cannot aspect the sun. Like, I really want to encourage you guys to start thinking like astrologers. What do you think it means that Mercury cannot aspect the sun? We know that when Mercury or any of the planets aspect a planet, it is sending its light, the rays of its light into that planet. But Mercury cannot send its rays into the sun. So Mercury cannot really affect the sun. And we learned from the sun lesson that the sun is the source of all consciousness and reality and wisdom and intelligence. So it's almost like Mercury cannot change or disrupt the truth. Mercury can play tricks on us and temporarily distort the truth, but the truth remains and it is always eventually revealed. Mercury is often swallowed by the sun. Swallowed by the sun means that Mercury is either under the beams of the sun or Mercury is combust. Basically, Mercury spends a lot of time being invisible. Mercury also spends a lot of time being debilitated because when a planet is so close to the sun, it gets burned by its heat. Mercury disappears from the sky a lot. So what do you think that says about the planet? It's describing something that isn't always there or isn't always readily available, readily visible, front and center. But it's also describing something that may undergo a lot of issues or a lot of challenges. Also, Mercury cannot trine or oppose Venus. We haven't talked about Venus yet, but we know that Venus is the planet of love, right? The planet of connection and approval. Venus is a planet that says yes, and Mercury cannot shine its light into Venus by opposition or by trine. We know that oppositions are the hardest aspect and trines are the easiest aspect. Mercury is a connector planet. It brings things together indirectly. So imagine there's two people. What Mercury is going to do is it's going to take what this person wants and it's going to transport it over to this person, like a middleman. Whereas Venus is going to push the two people together. Mercury can't oppose Venus because ultimately Mercury is a connector too. But also Mercury can't trine Venus because it's not that easy for Mercury. Mercury can't bring two things together by merging. The things have to stay separate. Now, I was hinting at the underworld earlier, and this is why. Mercury is the planet that can travel the furthest from the ecliptic. This right here is the ecliptic. Now, most planets, when they move, they follow this line pretty strictly. But Mercury has the ability to be like over here, up here, down here, up here, like just diverging from the line a little bit. Now, the ecliptic is the path of the sun, and we know that the sun creates reality, basically. It creates structure. It gives us light. And Mercury can step outside of that structure, outside of that reality, and outside of that light, which is symbolic of the underworld. But it's not just the underworld. Like, you can really fill in the blanks with lots of different realms that spirituality has discovered. So like you can call it another dimension, an alternative reality, the astral plane, the ancestral realm. Like you really can say anything here. But because Mercury can travel between these two worlds and also like acts as an intermediary, Mercury connects these two worlds together just by moving back and forth between them. In fact, in mythology, both Mercury and Hermes are said to be psychopomps. Psychopomps are mythical creatures who guide souls to the underworld. Mercury can get into places that are hard to get into. Okay, now let's talk about Mercury's cosmic affinities. Jupiter is Mercury's cosmic opposite. I think this picture is really good. So Jupiter collectivizes this side and Mercury atomizes. So Mercury is going to separate things, unravel them, make them distinct. Since these two planets are opposite, when Jupiter is in Mercury sign Gemini, Jupiter is in its detriment. These two planets represent opposite concepts, and as such, they undermine each other. Mercury's other cosmic opposite is Venus. This is because Venus represents sensuality. Mercury's always got a goal, right? It's always moving, always in action, always trying to do, accomplish, get somewhere, right? It travels so much. Venus is the opposite. It's not trying to do anything. It's just trying to live and exist and be. And since Mercury is such an intellectual, there's just no room for the sensual side to exist, right? Like when you're trying to be sexy, but you think about it too much, you look awkward. Or when you're trying to enjoy art, like watch a movie and someone is like overly explaining what's happening in the movie, it's like can get annoying. It's like, let the art speak for itself. That's why Venus is fallen in Mercury sign Virgo. Mercury is the only planet that has no cosmic affinity. I really want to hone in on Mercury's disruptive nature. There is an entire system of astrology, and Mercury literally exists to undo the whole thing. Every planet is either feminine or masculine. Mercury is neither. Every planet has an exalted sign and a domicile sign, and it's two different signs. Mercury has one sign acting as both its domicile and exaltation. That sign is Virgo. I'm going to diverge a little bit and talk about that because I never understood why Mercury has Virgo as its domicile and exaltation, but now I do. So Mesopotamian astrology predates Greek astrology for thousands of years. By the way, what I'm teaching you right now is Greek astrology. This is astrology that developed in the Hellenistic region, which is the area right around the Mediterranean, like Greece, Egypt, and part of the Middle East. The Mesopotamians developed a system of sacred places for the planets. These places later became known as exaltations for the Greeks. So in that system of sacred places, Virgo is Mercury's sacred place. So when the Greeks got a hold of this sacred place system, they merged it with their domicile system. So when they were trying to make everything balanced in one cohesive system called essential dignity, Mercury couldn't really find that balance there like the other planets could. That is the history lesson for why Virgo is both Mercury's domicile and exaltation. It actually fits because Mercury is so disruptive. This fucking planet is out here like flying out of the fucking ecliptic. Like, it makes sense that it does things a little bit different. We haven't talked about this yet, but every planet is considered nocturnal or diurnal, meaning that these planets act better in the daytime or they act better at nighttime. Yeah, Mercury is neither. So here's what Valons had to say about Mercury. Vedius Valons is a 2nd century Hellenistic astrologer, and he described Mercury as the bestower of forethought and intelligence. Also, education. I think these things make a lot of sense. He also says Mercury rules over debate, intellectual banter, numbers and geometry, hard sciences. We already talked about this. He also says the planet rules interpretation. I want to dwell on this one because I'm all about breaking modern astrology associations. So when we talk about psychic abilities in modern astrology, we usually talk about the outer planets, maybe the moon, maybe Jupiter, maybe. We don't ever talk about Mercury. Mercury is an interpreter. Mercury can speak every single language ever, even languages that are not human, even languages that are not of this world. Mercury can speak languages of inanimate objects. Like, Mercury is really that guy. Or actually, technically, since Mercury doesn't have a gender, Mercury is really that they. Astrology is traditionally ruled by Mercury because of the interpretive nature of us looking at the stars and interpreting what they mean for us. And it is also the reason why I have named myself 0 degrees Taurus. That's my Mercury placement. Mercury also rules markets, places where there's a big exchange of energy. Things are changing from one hand to another hand. There's haggling, there's selling, there's purchasing, acquiring, all of that stuff is all Mercury. He also connected Mercury to youth. Now, I've identified 2 reasons why, maybe 3. Mercury does not have a gender, right? And for us as humans, the stage of life where our gender is least noticeable or even least important is when we are youth. Or when, oh my God, you know what I mean. The second reason is in the Chaldean order, Mercury is placed at number 2. So in order, it goes the moon, Mercury, Venus, the sun, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. So the moon is like a newborn baby and Saturn is like a decrepit person on their deathbed. So Mercury comes after the stage of infancy, which is childhood, right? Youth. I don't know why I'm struggling today. I can't think of a third reason right now, but I'm sure it's there, okay? Mercury is connected to healing Mercury is connected to hearing, because you got to remember, in the ancient world, stories and information were communicated verbally, like verbal history and stuff like that, like overwritten history. Games. Mercury loves playing games, playing jokes. It's very youthful, but like also deceptive, like a very like playful, youthful deception. Communication, obviously, I don't think I need to say anything. Discoveries is a pretty common one because one of the significations of Gemini that we're all pretty familiar with is like Gemini is curious. Mercury in a whole is curious, which would mean Virgos would also share that curiosity. Weighing and measuring, that goes back into the marketplace and bartering and the hard sciences, balancing, calculating, measuring, all that good stuff. Okay, let's talk about what Mercury symbolizes in a birth chart. Mercury is going to show where things are subject to change, where they are inconstant, and where they disappear and reappear. For example, Mercury in the 1st house. We've got someone who can change their mind or change their appearance. Someone who doesn't always do things consistently. Or someone whose presence is just not constant. But if we put Mercury in the 9th house, now the things that are going to change are going to be 9th house stuff. Changing your major, having inconsistent faith or religious views, disappearing and reappearing like through traveling. And if we put Mercury in a sign, Mercury is going to do what it already does, but it's going to do it according to that sign. For example, Mercury in Aries. Mercury is going to do things in a Mars-like way. Maybe the things that come and go is like bravery, or even like standing up for something. Maybe those views aren't very stable. What's going to make you a really good astrologer is using your imagination. So what other things are subject to change? Your thoughts, your desires, your emotions. And you might ask yourself, well, isn't that moon stuff or Venus stuff? It can also be Mercury stuff. There can be overlap in the meanings between planets. In a birth chart, Mercury is going to describe the highest degree of technical knowledge and skill. What do I mean by this? It's going to describe your talents, your skills, things that you are really good at, things you are very proficient in. For example, Mercury in the second house may be very good at making money, but also very good at spending it, because Mercury is not a planet that really holds on to things. Mercury in the sixth house may be very good at buckling down and just getting shit done, but also may be prone to mental exhaustion because the sixth house is the house of hard ass laboring. Mercury in Taurus or Libra might have Venus skills, like creative, artistic, that sort of thing. Mercury in Aries or Scorpio might have Mars skills, very good at fighting, like verbal fighting, like debate. They're very good at arguing their perspective or defense and convincing you to go over to their side. Remember that Mercury is the source of human intellect. So your Mercury placement can really tell you about where in your life you're showing up as a scholar, or like someone who is very, very knowledgeable, what area of your life you're knowledgeable in, what field you're knowledgeable in. So Mercury in a birth chart can symbolize where things are subject to come undone, where logic falls apart, and where there's like a monkey wrench thrown into the mix. And remember, that all goes back to Mercury and how Mercury doesn't follow the rules. Mercury can tear concepts apart, like things that make perfect logical sense. Mercury will be the one who throws in that monkey wrench, and suddenly it's like chaos. Like what am I looking at anymore? For example, in the seventh house, that can describe someone's relationship sort of coming undone, like the rules of the relationship or the commitment or the vows or whatever the fuck you want to say that a couple established for themselves at some point, like they just get thrown out the window. Mercury in the eighth house, the house of other people's shit. Maybe there was an agreement that was made between two parties, or like a promise that was made between two people. And it gets to the point where it's like, that's not even what we agreed on in the first place. Mercury in Gemini and Virgo, though these are Mercury's home signs, when Mercury is in those signs, Mercury acts like Mercury. It's why I describe these signs as chaos. One minute you think you know them, the next minute it's like they completely change. Like they write rules for themselves and then they don't follow them. Now in a birth chart, Mercury can describe you, but it can also describe someone else in your life. So the people houses are the third house, the fourth house, the fifth house, the seventh house, the eighth house, sometimes the ninth house, and the 11th house. For example, if Mercury is in your 7th house or it rules your 7th house, you can expect your partner to be a person who is youthful in thought and action, skilled in dexterity, but inconstant or inconsistent in action. I don't know why I wrote inconstant. Meaning the way that this person speaks is as if they're younger than they actually are. The way that this person acts, same thing. They have a lot of motor skills and agility. They could be talented in some sport or some instrument or some game or like something like that. But this person could show up in a way that is inconsistent. If Mercury is in your 4th house or ruling your 4th house, this could really describe your family, the overall vibe of the people that you grew up with or the people that you live with. Remember that the 4th house is your family, but the 4th house is also your home. So even if you're not living with your family, but you're living with roommates, your roommates are going to act like this. And if Mercury is in your 11th house or rules your 11th house, your friends, the people that you are closest with, they're going to be like this. Remember that you do not need to follow these lists or these suggestions that I gave you. I gave you all this stuff so you can start thinking about it. Because the best astrologers, they don't need a cookbook and they don't really need to follow what their teachers say, because you have the principles, right? Like, you know that Mercury moves really fast. You know that Mercury is a planet that's now you see it, now you don't. You know that Mercury likes to play jokes. You know that Mercury represents youth. You know that Mercury can be inconstant or inconsistent. I don't know why I keep saying that. You can take these very basic principles and apply them to pretty much every single aspect of your life. Like, you're gonna find Mercury showing up in a whole bunch of places. So don't limit yourself to those lists. For example, the internet and trends, right? That's ruled by Mercury. Why? Because it moves so fast, it changes so often. A makeup artist can be ruled by Mercury. Why? Because that is a very technical skill. My AirPods can be ruled by Mercury. Why? Because I use them to take in information. Me doing this, patting my head and rubbing my belly, oh my god, I'm actually doing it. Like, this is Mercury. Because of that dexterity and agility and that expert movement of my hands. Okay, it looks silly, I don't know. Yeah. All you gotta do is meditate on it just a little bit and you'll see Mercury in many places, and then it'll become more apparent of what Mercury is symbolizing in your own birth chart.